What led you to write Pretence? Why the UK needs a written constitution?
Well, like everybody else, I lived through the Brexit years, which started with the referendum in 2016 and ended in 2020 when we left the European Union. But of course, we then had a pandemic, and that actually gave me the time to write the thoughts I had been thinking during the Brexit years.
And what is the book about?
Well, the title is Pretence, the subtitle is Why the UK Needs a Written Constitution. Perhaps I can read the first paragraph in the book, which I think does say what the project is. This book, containing legal history and analysis, is ultimately a work of advocacy. The title, Pretence, refers to the mythical crime, which is supposedly the source of state authority in our country. In truth, we are a representative democracy where political parties choose ministers and shadow ministers. I then quote a former judge, like so much else in British constitutional law, the label on the bottle has little to do with the contents, unquote. The subtitle, Why the United Kingdom Needs a Written Constitution, poses my concern as a constitutionalist and as a practicing lawyer. The legal tradition consolidated in the Age of Empire in the 19th century works less and less well in a global United Kingdom, still requiring much modernization in the 21st century. We need a codified constitution containing the rules by which the state is meant to and should function.
Why did you choose the portrait of Charles I for the cover?
Well, here it is, and aside from it being an excellent portrait, which is in a private house in the West Country, I chose it for the following reasons. It is Charles I. Now, at the time, Her Majesty was still Queen, though I had a vague suggestion that she might be followed by Charles III. That's one connection I was drawing. The other is, of course, that Charles I is the one king whose head we cut off when he was executed in 1649. And of course, we still live in what became a constitutional monarchy. And the third reason is, my favourite building in Westminster is Westminster Hall. That's where Charles I was tried. He was executed elsewhere. Now, Westminster Hall sits beside the Palace of Westminster, which of course is Victorian Gothic and my least favourite building in Westminster. So for a whole series of cultural allusions relating to my feelings about our constitutional history, I sought and secured the rights to that portrait.
Why do you describe the Boris Johnson government as sans culotte?
Sans culotte is a French term, and it is used in French political history. And while I was living through the Brexit years, it occurred to me that it was very appropriate. And I'm thinking of one day in July 2019, when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister without an election. The television cameras were allowed into number 10, and there we saw the Cabinet Secretary, Sir Mark, later Lord Sewell, if you like, presiding up and down the corridors, waiting to greet his next Prime Minister. But also we had lurking in the corridors one Dominic Cummings of Brexit referendum fame. He wasn't wearing a suit, he was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. He was also fixated on his mobile, and he, if you like, was the alternative alpha male to the Cabinet Secretary. Now, as things turned out, Sir Mark Sewell got himself sacked. Dominic Cummings was also sacked, though he may have walked out. And the Johnson government, even after the general election, was a very unstable, topsy-turvy regime. It did consider ideas that were not normally considered. It tried to implement some things, it failed to do other things. So I thought the best way of describing that government is not by being anti-Johnson and indeed venomous about the Prime Minister. The best way was to take from French political history a term and attach it to that government. And of course, the sans-culottes in France were not the upper class, were not the governing class, they were the lower class. And to an extent, the Johnson government, speaking for the Red Wall, was not so much a classical conservative government as a government where the people had a voice for a period of time, albeit their voice was not properly harnessed and albeit it did not follow through with good government.
Who are you seeking to persuade?
I'm seeking to persuade the political class and politicians from left to right, because this can only be a consensual project. I'm also seeking to engage with activists and lobbyists who, of course, make most of the politics in this country. So while I might have an instinct to be for somebody and against somebody else, I'm going to have to exercise a great deal of self-restraint and talk to those who want to talk to me, including those who don't want the project of a written constitution, plus those who want to go much further and are much more politically ambitious and will turn on me and say, that's not enough, we want more.
Who do you expect to engage with you?
I'm going to read another passage because I think, while thinking about it, I managed to summarize basically the two positions in any future argument there is. It's called Two Sides to the Debate. Constitutionalists come in many shapes and sizes. Here I identify in advance two groups or magnetic poles of attraction. They are not necessarily equal nor opposite. First, the common lawyers who think the Constitution exists already. They tend to wear ties and frequent common rooms, running the risk of soup stains. They talk about the old Constitution like a much-loved elderly relative. They are conservative, small c, but unlikely, except on the European Union, to be formally reactionary. They love the word balance, which creates a feeling of peace and tranquility of a romantic constitutional sort. And second, the survivors of Charter 88 from the late 1980s. The men among them do not wear ties on their university campuses and other locations, being given generally to hipsterism. Charter 88 comprised anti-Thatcherites who inspired New Labour constitutional reforms. However these hipsters mutate, they will want to write their radical politics into fundamental law. Regrettably, it may become possible to characterize the polls by demographics of the leaders, if not the followers. The old versus the young, men versus women, white versus ethnic and racial minorities, the home counties versus the inner cities, educated at public school in Oxbridge versus educated at the newer universities, etc. I'm wearing a tie today. That does not indicate an affiliation. And while I have been sarcastic about the other pole who want to stuff the Constitution with their politics, I am and am willing to engage with them in months and years to come.
And what is your position?
Well, people are always interested in tying their interlocutor down, so the best thing I can do is read a third passage, which is very short and sweet and summarizes my position. It goes as follows. Like the common lawyers, I respect the Constitution. However, I find much legal philosophy out of touch with reality. Like the radicals, I favour a written constitution. However, I oppose stuffing such a framework with one's minority politics. That's my position.
All right, now one question I'd love to ask is what you think the actual process would be if there was to be a constitution in the UK.
In one chapter in the book, I've tried to sequence that. It obviously has to be focused on Parliament. That brings in the political parties, but it brings also in the committees in the Commons and the Lords. I've actually suggested bringing in the 3 law commissions in the UK, who of course would be able to secure good draftspeople to start constructing a constitution. The people will be observers of much of that because all that is elite activity, but I am putting forward the idea of four referendums, one for England, one for Wales, one for Scotland, one for Northern Ireland, where each nation would vote on its future, but that would be in the context of an overall programme to decentralise and renew the United Kingdom. And the way the people in Parliament would interact is Parliament would enact the Constitution and then hand it to the people for approval. The people would either say yes, in which case it would go ahead. If the people said no, it would not proceed as a parliamentary statute. I'm in this game to succeed, not to fail, and the path between now and the future is strewn with obstacles, but also they constitute challenges.